I just spent the last couple hours here on my Monday night post work, putting together a handful of slides, and I I think each one is hitting on something important. And I decided to tie this to a a book I read that a lot of people have read. It was a New York Times bestseller, so hit all the podcast circuits, so popular at the time. And man, I've gone back to it 3 or 4 times. It's almost like Atomic Habits in that way, where you just, every time you read it, you're like, oh, it's brilliant. I got to hold on to that little factoid or that little phrase. And this one is called Psychology of Money. It's written by Morgan Housel, who is a finance journalist, basically. Um, and he is a incredible observer of the human condition, and then applying that to practical advice, tips for how you manage your own finances and your relationship with money. Because as we'll get into, it is so much more than just a surface level, how you think logically about managing your money, your finances long term. So here's the main takeaway that I would have for anyone is just how you behave with money matters more than what you know about money. And almost, it reminds me of this, I think it's a Maya Angelou quote where she says, people will not remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And it's not directly related, but it's one of my favorite quotes. And I think about that as it relates to your relationship with money. Is money makes us feel things, and in turn, assets make us feel things. And those can be awesome. Like in collecting, one of my central tenets is collect what makes you feel something. However, that can get twisted because those emotions and feelings drive a lot more of our decision making than cold logic often does. And so not just knowing and being educated, but actually how you decide to behave and react with your money is incredibly important. So here is where we'll jump into the quick summary. I'm not going to, this is a bunch of words on this page. I'm not going to read all of these, but we'll go one by one, spend a couple minutes on each page, and try to tie the overall lesson into sports cards, okay? So the first one, luck and risk are real but invisible. I think about this so much in every interview with a CEO, a founder. When I was tasked with doing that myself, talking to CEOs, founders, management teams, trying to uncover what made their business great, I was always skeptical of, do these people really have a handle on controlling the controllable, executing at a high level, holding people accountable, training great people beneath them, the things that are important to success that can be controlled or within our control in some regard, versus are they someone who is mostly capable and competent, but has found themselves at the end of a nice run of luck. And as we think about some of these videos that come out in the sports card hobby that are highlighting amazing collections, the Howard Kendrick, is that right? Ken Kendrick, sorry. Ken Kendrick, I was thinking of Howie Kendrick, the second baseman. Ken Kendrick, the owner of the Diamondbacks, Marshall Fogel, the attorney with the PSA 10 mantle. I think they both actually have them. There are, actually just saw one today with the Indie Card Exchange guy. He's got an amazing, $1 million plus collection. These folks were, at least in the first two, were very wealthy before cards. and use some of that wealth on cards and memorabilia. But they also accumulated a lot of things that occurred in this time frame. In the early days of the tracked online card market. And to say those people were smart for doing that was is the incorrect label. Fundamentally, what they were doing was a hobby. It was not even really speculation. It was tucking away some cash in exchange for some feelings around a baseball card, maybe some status that comes in with owning certain things. But as you see, these things were ticking up. And I remember hearing stories of people saying, like, if you wanted a card from someone, you just kind of had to offer 20% more than what they paid for it at auction, last year. And that would usually unstick something really special. That's, of course, not true for everyone, but there was not a making money hand over fist, tons of volume, things spiking all the time for all of this period. And for them to assume that this was anything other than, like almost like a bond return rate, like a low single digits or mid single digits return on their investments would have been, them dreaming. And so when I see people say, "Oh, it's an amazing collection," like, you're so smart to get that in, ahead of all the spike, it's like they got lucky. They took a risk. They probably will say to you now, in some cases, they saw that there was a ton of opportunity and that there was, that they knew there was going to be some type of, market upswing at some point. They could never predict the COVID boom, but blah, blah, blah. They got lucky. And for all of this period, they were making less on cards than they would have in the market, in the S&P. That changed with the COVID boom. And another piece here is, again, I'm not trying to talk negatively about great collectors. I just mean they found themselves at the fortune of luck over anything else. And that happens in the market as well. This is one of the key tenets in his book, is that it's really hard to tell if this only showed the orange line. It would be very difficult to say, or only showed the two lines but no labels. You'd look at this and say, like, what is the difference here? Especially at the end of October 2024, where we reached the end of the chart. If you were to look at someone here, and let's add some zeros. Let's say this person is worth $125 million. This person is worth $350 million. How would you determine the difference here? Like, you would say, wow, this person's like a much better investor, or has been 3 times or 2 times more successful in their career. They must have an incredible network, or they must have an incredible product that is so much better than everything else in the market. No, turns out this person in the blue line simply bought the S&P 500 in 1989 and never sold out. They just kept compounding and caught every upswing and downswing in the market. The person in the orange line over here did all of that the same, except at a certain point, especially in 2008, becomes a little bit more apparent, because that's when some of the best days were. So let's say this person at a certain point decided, I'm going to skip out on 10 days of investing in, 36 years of their investment career. So they started investing in December 1989. They are still invested in October 2024. But during those 36 years, they skipped 10 days. the worst luck in the world, because those 10 days were the 10 best days the S&P 500 had over the last 36 years. And if they missed those 10 days, their value or their net worth is less than half of what it could have been. So there's nothing you could say that is like, oh, this person is so much smarter, so much, they knew how to time it all right. Like they figured it out. I got to learn from this person. No, this person just had some bad luck, and this person didn't make any decisions other than letting compounding do its work. That is all some commentary on overall market picture. I know it's less relevant to sports cards here, but I wanted to lay that groundwork because this last piece, respecting uncertainty, is so critical to all of this. We don't know what's going to happen with sports cards, with our money. We have to make a intentional decision around the risk we're taking with any decision around investing money or speculating with money. And sports cards is certainly one of them. So let's go to some horror stories. Okay. In this case, I'm going to use a personal example where Housel decides to call out, and this is actually depicted very well on the prior page. In most cases, the outliers account for the majority of results. You do not need to do a 20% return on every investment you make. In almost all cases, there are moonshots or, second, third deviation outliers that do so much better than all of the losses combined that they offset those, and therefore you look like a winner at the end. This is deployed by Tesla and Amazon and Microsoft, famously Apple. All of these companies make a habit of investing in high TAM opportunities, total addressable market opportunities, with low chances of working. So they know that in a portfolio of how they spend their time operationally and in their strategy, they got to nail their core, do a great job at what they do, at what they sell it to the majority of their customers, try to improve it a little bit over time. So stretching it to the second rung. And then the final area bucket is moonshots, swinging for the fences, because that's how Amazon came up with AWS. It's how actually Microsoft kind of got into video games, which became an interesting, dominant market layer for them. Apple decided to get into their headphones, which has become basically their best recurring revenue stream. Like there's these little things that people decide to do that maybe in the beginning they didn't expect was going to be like the winner, but they took considered bets and they worked out. There are also, for each of those companies, examples where they took hundreds of $1 million of bets and they did not work out. The goal is that over time, the wins outset the losses. And for me personally, that has been more or less true. I do not try to make a living on sports cards or buy with the intention of making a margin on them. However, as someone who has thrifted since I was a kid with my mom and was a professional investor for 10 years, it's hard for me to pass up on a good deal where I think I can make some money. And so I'm always scouring auctions and card shows for just a break, an arbitrage, something where I'm like, that's a cool card, I want to own it. And also I think I can make $400 on that, or $100 on that, or 1,000, whatever it is. I do not bat 1,000 on that. I'm actually I have done the math. For a long time I avoided doing the math because I didn't want to see how bad some of my decisions were. But yeah, this actually perfectly describes the and I'm not going to show it, but it's a list of every one of my cards that I've owned and how much I spent on them and how much I ultimately sold them for, or what is a reasonable market value. I have a low, a high, a mid market value. If it's still in my collection, where do I think it sits? And I am up versus it is worth more than what I have put in. I would have done much better if I put in the S&P 500. So don't take like investment advice from me on cards, but my wins have offset the losses. That being said, majority of the time, the losses and the wins are 10, 20, 30%. There are specific examples where that is not the case, and those are the outliers. In this case, that sale, I have searched for 1948 Leaf, Jackie Robinson, PSA 3.5, sorted by price. The highest sale of all time is yours truly. I spent $32,400 plus tax on this copy because I had FOMO. It was peak 2021. I was watching, well, I'll get into it later, but there were a number of reasons why I said I need to own this. And a big part of it was because I thought this is an amazing card, an essential card. I didn't see one at Dallas. One popped up at Heritage. It looked pretty good. And I was like, man, there's these things aren't around. These things, this is my opportunity. And like, this could be $100,000 card one day. People are spending that much money on LeBron James rookie cards. Jackie Robinson's more important and there's less of them. And so I thought, man, this could be huge. I got to get this. I bought that card, $32,000. I ultimately, within 2 weeks, the market started to turn. There was the following week a 2.5 that came up on eBay, and I bought that one as well for the highest sale price ever on a 2.5 for like $20,000. So all in, I had like 55, 60, I don't know, somewhere in that range. On my Grail card, my favorite card of all time was the 1948 Leaf Jackie Robinson. My favorite player in his rookie card. One that I dreamed of owning. I was over the moon. I had them both on my desk. I just couldn't, I was so like, I've reached it. I've reached the pinnacle of like business success, whatever. Is when I thought I was a kid. It's like, I can't believe I got a chance to own these. It was so awesome. The market starts to turn within a few weeks. And within a couple of months, I am now staring at comp after comp that is going down. And I got worried. And so at the National that year, I made a point to get rid of both of them because I hated staring at them on my desk, which was a really weird change from really loving it. But I was staring at them and just staring at lost money. Like, oh, I made such a dumb decision. And so I ultimately sold the 2.5 for $10,000. So that was like a $10,000 loss. And then the 3.5 I was able to use as partial trade towards a Satchel Paige 48 Leaf at the National, PSA 1. And that value was like roughly $15,000 maybe. So lost about $17,000, $18,000 on that card. And those are my two worst losses. And there aren't many that come close to that. Like, I'm trying to think. No, I mean, I learned my lesson. I have not lost money on a big card like that since. I have lost $1,000 here and there, maybe $2,000. No, I don't even think that. Maybe. But those I really lost big, like a new car worth of money just evaporated by me basically making boneheaded decisions around FOMO and not looking at all the market variables. I just wanted to own the card. That was an outlier. In addition, there were outliers in my collection that I have sold, and a handful that I have not yet sold, but still sit at, unrealized gains, but strong profits if I were to ever sell. And that one that I sold, which my largest win, was a 1954 Topps Jackie Robinson autographed. I don't like the 54 Topps. I think it's a weird image of Jackie. And yeah, it just doesn't do it for me. And yet I owned two of them. I paid about $10,000 each before the run up in signed vintage. And then I ended up selling one of them to a dealer for about $48,000, I want to say. So in that one sale, I made $38,000. And that offset these two big losses. Again, I have sold a number of other cards. I can't remember ever really making anything close to that. I mean, maybe 10 grand a couple of times, but usually it's more like, more reasonable returns, not 3-4x returns. But that was an outlier, and those things matter, and you can't account for them. And when you swing and miss, learn from it, like I did, because I bought that 54 Jackie afterwards because I thought it was more rare, more interesting. It was autographed. And so you learn from that outlier, that negative outlier, and then maybe one of these positive outliers come along. But you've got to stay invested, or at least interested, and hang around the hoop for those things to happen. All right. More time than I thought on this one, but let's keep going. So this is, I think, quicker, but so I'll just be quick with it. Small, consistent gains in money, relationship, skills over long periods create extraordinary outcomes. This image on the left was on my desk for a long time, just getting 1% better every day versus 1% worse every day over the course of a year. The power of compounding is astronomical. Really hard to, like, this would not have been something that I imagine any of us could have really guessed or intuited. But it is how the math works out. 37 times better versus 3% of what they once were, basically. So compounding is incredibly important. And the key piece here that I thought was interesting was not just looking at compounding as, okay, I got to put my money in the market and just let it do its thing over long term, because we hate long-term delayed gratification. It's not just that. It's also your knowledge base, your relationships, your skills. Those can all compound. And it still requires consistent effort, consistent engagement. But doing those things before spending the money, if I had just waited a couple more months on the Jackie, I was really scared it was going to become a $100,000 card. But if I really did my work and used my skills for my job, I know I could have figured out that that's pretty unreasonable outcome, especially staring at where we were in this chart, which was like right about here, maybe. And I should have known that was not sustainable. But we live and we learn. And that's what I love about what he says here is, like, there's no, like, get rich quick leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouth for a reason. It just rushed competency or, trying to just jump ahead and have the best collection always leads to mistakes and less effective, in my opinion, than the slower build over time. Okay, this is a really difficult one, I think, for many of us in the hobby to get our heads around. But there's a spicy take in here, but I'm going to use an example again from real life that I think could be useful. What he says here is saving does not require, a vacation fund or a rainy day fund, or, when they say, like, have 3 months or 6 months of your fixed expenses saved up. Saving towards a house. All those things are great, but getting in the habit of saving for the sake of it and for chasing the goal of freedom, or freedom in your decision making, ultimately in your time one day with retirement or whatever, that is a very useful like exercise in discipline. Um, because what will and for practical advice in the hobby, what will consistently happen is some card will pop up like, oh, I didn't even think about it. I needed that one, but that's a sweet card. Or that's a great deal. I'm going to grab that. And then a month goes by and the card you actually really want, like, oh shoot, and I forgot about that. I've been looking for that one for a while and that one's so awesome. But I just put my, $1,000 or $10,000 into that card last month that I didn't even really care about. And now I like compared to this one, I thought I did at the time, but compared to this one, it's just, oh man. And you end up trying to move that one and it's difficult. And so you're kind of stuck where, man, I wish I had just was a little bit more disciplined, focused on where I wanted to focus, waited knowing that the card's going to come around that I want, and I want to be ready. I want to have ammo, dry powder on the sidelines to put to work into like a card I really want. And another example of this would be, like for putting discipline to work before it's like essential, I guess. In this case, if you are a collector who is and maybe I can zoom in here, yeah, who is staring at this at auction, and this actually is not my card, but I know the consigner. It was from a incredible collection, the Mike Greenbaum collection, and he had got these all signed in the Bronx outside Yankee Stadium in the period of like 1949 to 55. So playing days Jackie Otto, very cool. But has the snow. It's a rushed autograph, rounded corners, little light at times. Has flaws, but is an amazing card nonetheless. What is important here is this was the first public sale of a Jackie Robinson 1954 Topps signed card since 2017. So it had been 7 years since a PSA graded copy had come to market, if I remember that correctly. And that last time it was at Golden, I think it sold for like $3,000. So this coming up, you're like, oh my God, what a special, special card. I got to chase that. And what it ended up doing was $56,000. I thought that was way too high. And that's when I sold my copy for $48,000 based on this comp. And I was right. The very next like main auction from Heritage, this was their Platinum Night auction, and then their summer catalog auction came up. There was an even better copy that showed up. Very good centering, stronger autograph, stronger card, no snow. And it sold for about 80% of less than 80% of what the previous one sold for. And so and I imagine the person who bought it was probably the underbid here. And when you take one bid out of the market, you don't know what, especially at this high end level, you don't know what that could do to the values of certain cards. And what we saw was the 56 became 42 for an even better card. And then just a month later, another one popped up, and that one sold for 75% of what the prior one said. So supply is impacting this market. Bidder fatigue. We've lost the top two bidders now, and this goes to the third place, and who is competing with the fourth place, who maybe bailed at 30,000 on this one and let these two guys run up. And if they just practice some discipline, they could get a steal on a card. It's not every day that there's three amazing cards that pop up in 6 months who haven't been seen for 7 years. That's certainly coming into play here, but it highlights an example of discipline even before you really need to exercise that. If you try it, it can sometimes work in your favor. And now the market has started to return. This is actually the same card that sold again at a different auction site, 6 months later for what, I guess a 20% increase or 15% increase. And, that's, I guess, just part of the game. I don't know what to say too much about that one. But one spicier take I had was, I've sometimes been selling cards and people will reply to my story and say, hey man, like, I get paid next week, I can buy it then. Or, I wish I could afford it right now, but I just bought a different card. And I've said things like that before where I'm like, I don't have the money laying around that I want to put towards that right now. But when I say that, I'm not saying like I literally don't have the money. I'm saying like I just don't have the appetite to spend that money. Case. But if it's actually like, hey, waiting, like I'm stretching on every single card and like, no savings in the bank, that's a risky financial decision in life. And Morgan Housel, if you read the book, has like a ton of great examples behind it. But two, also leads to a poor collector experience, I think, where you no longer now have the ammo to ultimately get the bigger, cooler card that maybe you really want to get. And maybe you're happy with buying the $100 card every 2 weeks, and that's good. Like, I'm not talking to those people, but I'm referring to more like, hey, flexibility and getting some money saved, tucked away, and not just chasing the card that's available that you think looks cool can be a good option and something to consider in the hobby, and something that I, probably need to listen to myself a little bit more often. Okay. This is my favorite. Maybe let me say it differently. This quote hit me like a rock, and when I read it, and it stuck with me the whole time reading this book. So I'll just pause here, and I guess I'll read it in case you're just listening on another tab. At a party given by a billionaire on Shelter Island, Kurt Vonnegut informs his pal Joseph Heller that their host, a hedge fund manager, had made more money in a single day than Heller had earned from his wildly popular novel Catch-22 over its whole history. I'll pause there because, whoa, this hedge fund guy has invited these two famous authors to his house, and he made more money in a single day than one of the best novels in American history, or in recent American history, Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. Heller responds, yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough. And that is, that's probably going to call out a lot of people. I stare at my collection often, and I kind of joke to myself, sometimes other collectors, like my favorite card is the next card. And I forget to practice the gratitude, the realization that I probably have enough. Like, I don't know what. And I include this quote on the side, how will you know when you have enough cards? Like, I'm talking to myself here because I don't know the answer to that. I have checklists. I have sets that I go after, but then I just end up getting a new set that I want to chase, or I retire that and pivot. So I find something else because the chase is super fun, and that's evolutionarily logical why that is. We love to hunt down things. I put it here. One of my core beliefs is that dissatisfaction was like an adaptive trait for the human species during its evolutionary process. It was good to have that hedonic treadmill where like everything that we love at first we get used to, and then we look for something more, because we were always striving as a species to not rest on our laurels. Basically, we need to be curious, be hopeful that we'll find something that can satiate us. And to have that desire, we need to be in a state of dissatisfaction. or at least be influenced in the kind of the melting pot. So I think it's natural for us to look at our collection and actually just, yeah, totally makes sense biologically to look at our collection and say, this isn't enough. I need to go get the next thing. But there is an antidote for that in being, one, awareness, and two, gratitude, and finding new ways to enjoy your collection beyond just kind of flipping through the tabs or the slabs in your Zion case. So I put this out there as a reminder. I mean, Morgan Housel uses it in his book to determine something a little bit more professionally oriented, where people will, in my old industry, private equity, people would often talk about, like, what's your number? Like, what is the number that when you hit that, you're out? Because, like, we all hate our job, we all hate our life. But when I get 10 million bucks, I'm out. And then you talk to that same person 2 years later, and their number is now $20 million. They haven't even reached the first one, but since lifestyle creep and they see what's available, their number keeps going up. Doesn't ever come down. And that is, again, like normal, human, whatever. But if we don't try to work with that and rein it in, we can find ourselves in some like tricky, sticky situations, especially with this hobby, which is so easy to spend money. It's so easy to buy in this hobby. It's often more difficult to sell and make money. So, yeah, I just want to put that out there. I thought it was an interesting quote, and I'd encourage you to reflect on this question here. I certainly need to. Okay. This kind of came up earlier, so I'm going to fly through it a little bit here. But one thing he brings up is try to find the happy middle. If you ever think, oh man, everything's caving in, we're headed to oblivion, you're wrong. And if you think, wow, this market is on fire, it's never going down, you're wrong. So I look at Pokemon right now. That market is going to settle. I do think there's some tailwinds for it, in that a lot of the people who loved it in the early days when it was released are now coming into spending money and in their 30s or late 20s, and that creates more demand for these cards. But they were so overproduced that this like 50 to 100% spike in prices in the last year is not sustainable. I didn't have that much conviction when it was early 2021 in that statement. I was like, maybe this thing I love, everybody's going to love it. And I just hadn't spent enough time compounding knowledge and experience and learning from my failures, mistakes, to say, you know what, no, I got to wait this out. But now I try to catch myself. And especially with this book, he gives some great examples of, people who thought it was all going to shit, and they bail, they do something that takes them out of the game. And just around the corner was a time when it was going to turn around. And vice versa. People who have it all going for them, long-term capital management, the stories that happened then where I was just printing money over and over and over again. Eventually, that didn't end up going well for them. So avoid those extremes. And let's keep going. All right, so we're hitting the stride here. This plays into my purchases of those 48 leaf jackies that I talked about earlier. This influencer, who's no longer on YouTube, was pushed to me by the algorithm, Sasha T. He was really fun to watch. Did all these crazy deals, traveling the country, Dallas, all this stuff, LA, Burbank. He had this famous video of trading for a $500,000 first edition Charizard. And I just looked at him and his buddies, and they were all making money. And I was staring at it on YouTube, and I'm like, I'm a smart guy. Like, I got money. I could do this. Like, I could do what they do. And I just kind of got over my skis. Like, what I didn't catch was that I just was like, oh, well, like I know I know how to make decisions financially. Um, but I didn't see that he had spent like 2 years learning what moves, how to sell a card, like how to buy a card, when to, like, what is a reasonable actual price versus the listing, or versus what things have sold for. Like, you can actually get things for less, or, how available is this really? Do people, is this rare because no one really wants it, or is it rare and scarce and that really worth paying up for? He had all these like trained muscles that I didn't fully see. And he was like a high risk guy. Like, he was totally cool just putting his whole savings, everything he's got, into a, Charizard card. Um, I, one, didn't have all that experience that he had, and two, am not that high risk. And those two things like did not work in my favor for me feeling good about going like big into sports cards. And I also had this bend towards vintage, and I wanted to make that work with their model. And I didn't even really give this a real try, but I did like have this logic in my head and think, I can do it. Let me spend money. And then that was when I made all my worst purchases. And it was unfortunately on like my favorite cards, which kind of soured my appreciation for those cards, even till today, somewhat. But I think I've gotten better there. Another piece is that, Jeff Wilson, like, he's got more than this in his bank. I'm sure that that's the case. More than the 4 million. He is not someone that anyone should compare themselves to. And when you watch these trades and he's like always just kind of rounding up, like giving people the deal, whatever, one, it's not as meaningful to him. And two, he's making money on these videos. So if he loses $100 or $1,000 on these deals, he's making that back in other ways. And it makes us engage in content. People want to buy more from him, whatever. So it's easy to look at people online and say, oh, and I get this a little bit too. At Fanatics Fest, there was a couple of like kind of frank conversations that happened at my table. People just older than me looking at my cards and saying like, there was clearly just something in the air that was, what's the word? They were like, this kid's younger than me. Like, why don't I have these cards? Or like, I could get these cards or something. But like, we don't, we're just totally different people, different stories, different pressures. Like, I don't have kids and a wife who's telling me to do something different with my money. And I had a job that paid very well for a long time. And I was able to save and invest in the right ways so that there was some discretionary funds, more so than the average 32-year-old or whatever. And so like, just, it could be easy to look at just the face value, like, oh, Sasha T, like former, didn't even graduate college, but like really likable guy, really smart guy, whatever. Like, but I graduated college, so I could be better than him. That's like one data point. I missed out on thinking through a ton of other things. And so it's just not worthy of your time to do that comparison game. It's a thief of joy, all of that. But also, it is just, it makes for a lesser collecting experience if you are only looking at the best of the best and saying, dang, I'm not that. So like, recognize the circle. And here's what I would say: create a group of people that you respect and collect for yourself and them. And ideally, they're respecting you for going after what you like. Because if you have those cheerleaders and you're cheerleading them, that'll make for a really satisfying collector experience. And so curating, I put it here, like, curate your community, curate the people that, you're excited to send a text to and say, like, check out this pickup. And it's not necessarily for their approval, but just that that they are someone who will help you appreciate the card. And so you don't just feel like, oh, I've got to have the best card with the most amount of likes on Instagram. Otherwise, like, it's not even worth it. That's not the way to think about it. And I've caught myself in that many times. And I've finally, I think, gotten to a place where I'm very happy with going after what I like. And I have some people that I know will enjoy each little segment of my collection, and that's good. So let's move on. Okay. This I'll summarize very briefly, which is, I think I just unplugged my camera or my light somehow. So, oh well, now I'm a little darker. But this I will summarize very briefly, which is Morgan comes up with this tons of examples of underscoring a central tenet of public market investing and any investing. Private market actually more relevant today, but it was originally created by, I think, Baupost, like the founder that wrote this book called Margin of Safety. So do all your analysis in the financial world. You're doing all this diligence. You're doing a model projection analysis, coming up with comps and DCFs or LBOs, whatever you want to do to come up with your valuation. And then you're saying, I figured out what this thing's worth. This is what I can pay for it to get my target return. The pitch that Morgan and Seth Klarman made from Baupost was add a margin of safety below that. Your assumptions are wrong the minute you press print. Your analysis is flawed because no one can fully account for all the variables at play, that both are controllable and not controllable. And so buying something like at the value that you think it perfectly is, if your goal is to eventually sell or make sure that you don't totally go over your budget or like overextend, always target that margin of safety. And determining that is difficult in the card market. But I think what I try to do is best eye appeal for the value. So in many cases, like you can go buy if you want a Frank Robinson rookie, PSA 7, that's like $1,000 card or something. Like maybe you can go buy that, but maybe the 7 you're seeing is just like average. And this is that trend that everyone is going after now. Eye appeal. My buddy Matty C here, Matt, is creating a company called Eye Appeal. It's launching July 7th. So, and the goal is to determine like this card is better than this card. Even though PSA says it's an 8.5 and this one's a 2, we all will prefer this card if you just looked at this and there was no label at the top. And so his goal is like put the power back in the collector's hands and say, for 14 grand, less than 1% of what or less than 2%. Yeah, less than 1.5%. There's my math major. Hopefully I got that right. You can get a better looking card. So that's amazing, best eye appeal for the value. And maybe you compare it then to other 2s, which are probably more like $8,000-$9,000 cards. So then maybe you're considering actually that's not that great value. But in this comparison, obviously there's a clear answer. So I always try to figure out, okay, what's this thing worth? Let me try to get it for less. I have many times paid full value or more than full value. And in my Why'd You Buy That, I'm sure you're going to see some examples of that. But I like to, get something for less than it's worth. Because then I know, one, it's just fun that way, but also I have a little bit of that margin of safety built in. Okay, let's move on. We're heading towards the home stretch. Just a couple quick slides left. This is one that I think is an obvious reminder, but man, is it easy to forget at times, especially when you're like us, kind of overexcited, obsessed hobbyists, collectors, it can be very easy to spend that extra hour on eBay or go to that third weekend card show of the quarter or something, instead of spending that time with loved ones or on other kind of healthy life decisions. And getting those priorities right, man, like that is the real wealth. Morgan, in his book, he talks about this both in the family, like invest in your love life and your people that you kind of find meaning and closeness from, but also attaining wealth. The goal is not then to spend it. Like it is to, if you're going to spend it on your freedom. Spend it on like your time freedom. So like you're getting money so then you can make decisions about how you spend your time and be in the driver's seat. For many of us, that's a very attractive proposition. But also for most of us who come into money, quickly or at a young age, whatever, you feel like, oh, cool, let me buy something. Like, let me start. This is what you do. Like you make some money, you're working banking or whatever. And you start spending money. And that is like in the formula for net worth, that is a negative towards value creation, wealth creation. So spending money is not the goal of having money. That is important to remember with cards. There are plenty of people I know who do not have the best Instagram collections, but have far more in the bank, or far, if it's not that, far happier lives than a lot of us at home, and more fulfillment. So obviously multiple ways to talk about wealth here, but don't feel compelled to spend as much as other people are, even if they're in a similar situation to you. Because I think what he's encouraging here is like, you're getting more than you realize from having that compounding interest work towards your freedom of time and decision making. Also, as a reminder, sports cards are not a 401k. People talk about that. They joke about that. That is incorrect. That is not a good decision. Anyone will tell you that who is outside of the hobby and a financial advisor. I am not an official financial advisor, but I've talked to plenty of them. The typical guidance is like 5 to 15% of a portfolio is on alternative assets. That you can see here in the global asset chart from 2022. Roughly that chunk is alternative assets altogether. But then even within that alternative assets, they promote diversification, real estate being one of them. Here you can see that the average asset manager is putting some chunk towards private equity, hedge funds, infrastructure, natural resources, and real estate. So like that 5 to 15%, I imagine most of us who are watching YouTube content have a crazy collection, probably are past that. I am past that. But I'm not at 50% and 100% or whatever, excluding, some of us might be like in cap, including a house or not. But really, this is a difficult thing, I think, when you're first joining, like, whatever, like, I'm not going to put that much money towards it. But then you're 4 years into collecting and you've got all these big ideas and, big eyes, but it can be easy to be like, oh, this money's just sitting here. Like, let me just buy that card. You do that 10, 15, 20 times, like you're eating into an unhealthy asset mix, especially for something that is a speculative item, not a true asset. So this is just a warning, information, put it out there that we have to accumulate and then diversify in the right ways and not put too many eggs in one basket like sports cards. Okay. Final page before the summary. Behavior over brilliance. I thought this was just a couple of good ways to put a button on this. we do not have to try to be outsmarting the market, find every best deal. Don't chase down every single thing that you could, find your lanes. And one thing that ChatGPT suggested when I put this in, when I was talking through this idea with it, it suggested a personal collecting plan, which I thought was, a cool idea. So here's some examples. Who do you collect? Why? What's your typical budget? What are your priorities? Who are you going to go after? We talk about that going into the national or big shows, like having a plan of what you're going for, so you don't just blow your budget on like the first cool thing you see, and practice that discipline. And then figure out, this was a great one, how do you experience your collection? What is your enjoyment plan? So not just the collecting, but what is your plan for enjoying your collection? I'm trying to do that with my Why'd You Buy That series, where I spend some time talking about each individual card that means something to me. But also, Instagram, I post there, interacting with the collectors. I do love that. Blowout Cards is another great forum where I found that there's a really supportive collector base there. Net54 is another forum for more pre-war, and that can be a cesspool at times. But find these little areas that you can find enjoyment from your collection. So if you do that, you do the small things right, the GOAT coach John Wooden says, then big things can happen. Maybe your PC grows to an incredible place if you put some of these ideas to work. And obviously, I'm preaching or I'm leaning towards that at times in this video, but I think there's some really useful insights here. Please take a screen grab. Leave comments if you disagree, have additional ideas, thoughts, advice. Would love to hear that and engage with you there. Reach out on Instagram. Hope you enjoyed this, found this useful. And do please remind yourself to at least collect things, not that just that you like, but kind of bring something out of you, make you feel something, and then cheer each other on, build a community. That connection with other collectors is, that's the stuff. I mean, that's what we're chasing besides the cardboard. So that's what I got. Hope you enjoyed the video, and it is now 10:20. I've got to go to bed for this 4 a.m. flight. So catch you on the next one. Please like and subscribe, and leave a comment because that helps me find more collectors. Thanks.